Sure. So welcome everybody. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we all meet today. I think many of you would probably be, because you're part of the PPIMS network, be on Yagara or Turrbal or Ningi Ningi lands. I'm on Yagara and Turrbal here in cloudy, maybe going to rain, North Brisbane. Look, thank you everyone for registering. It's great to see you all, well, sort of face to face. I'm very, very excited that Dr. Louise Byrne, Lou, has generously been working with us, not only our PPIMS network, but at a national level with our PHNs around Australia, running these series of webinars. I've known Lou since, gosh, about six years now, and met way back when Lou was doing some research around barriers and issues for why organisations weren't picking up and running with lived experience workforce. And around that time there was I think it was Mental Health Workforce or something, Health Workforce Australia did a big lit review and showed all the evidence base for lived experience and all of that. And for those of you that may not directly know Lou, she has been, she's internationally renowned in terms of working in this space. So again, we are very fortunate to be able to claim some of her time to share with us. When we first met Lou, Lou was contracted in Queensland by the Queensland Mental Health Commission when we were actively lobbying that we needed a framework, you know, for developing the lived experience workforce. So we undertook, well, Lou and her team did an awesome, authentic co-design process and developed that for us. She continued on a whole bunch of other research as well. But Lou's was also the contractor to develop the national guidelines for lived experience workforce. And again, another awesome co-design best practice process by her and her teams. I don't want to say too much, but I just, this stuff's critically important, because what we have now is national guidelines and foundations to really get this walking the talk around building the lived experience workforce. So this series of webinars is just that, you know, they were launched in December last year, so fairly new. This series of webinars is to for Lou just to talk through, explain a bit about some of the key things that are contained within the guidelines, but also at the broader level, some of the fabulous research that Lou and her team have been involved with. And there will be opportunities throughout Lou's presentations for questions and answers, you know, Q&A sessions. If something pops into your mind while Lou's talking, feel free to pop it into the chat and we'll monitor that. But there'll definitely be time for Q&A. I don't know if I need to say anything else. I guess just housekeeping. So if people could just pop on mute, I'll have to, so you don't hear my washing machine shortly. And, for those just joining us now, if you just pop into the chat your name, if you're linked with any, you know, organisation, lived experience, anything you'd like to share about yourself, please do, so we all know who's here today. Because we want to maximise having the fabulous Lou here, we won't go around and do the hellos. I think many of us would know each other because we're part of the PPIMS network. You see, Faye Jackson's just joined us. Hey, Faye.
Hello. I can't find the background to block out my washing. And...
Oh, don't worry, my laundry's just there too. So, oh, everyone would know the fabulous Faye Jackson too. And oh, we've got Robin Priest here too, Faye. So
yeah, Rob and I've already said hello to each other.
okay, that's good. Anyway, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to hand it over to the fabulous Lou, and I hope you enjoy the session. So over to you, Lou.
Thank you, Paula. And embarrassingly warm welcome from you as always. It makes me feel very humble to be described that way by someone like yourself, who's doing such incredibly important work and pulling so many pieces together across the country. And it is, as always, an absolute pleasure and honour to work with you and to have the excuse to work with you. I feel very lucky. So folks, it's a little weird doing this for so many people that I've known for so long. It just feels like we should be having a yarn, but there is a lot of information to get through, so I'm going to do my usual delivery. If people don't mind, yeah, just checking their mics before are on mute before we get started. And I'm going to share my screen now. As Paula mentioned, there will be plenty of opportunities for questions throughout and then at the end, and you'll know that it's that time because there'll be a big screen that says questions. So as I'm sure everyone knows, I'm a lived experience researcher with a significant ongoing living experience. And as Paula mentioned, my program of research really focuses on lived experience workforce development and the needs of our workforce. So just before we get started, once it comes to question time, I have a brain injury as well as hearing loss, and that hearing loss includes some distortion, which makes hearing aids useless. But what is really helpful is when you ask questions, if you don't mind just leaning towards and speaking directly into your microphone, facing the screen, and just speak nice and loud. Even if you're feeling shy, try and give me your big voice, and I should definitely be able to hear you. That's it. Well, let's get into the guts of it. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all respectively meeting. In my case, it's my privilege to live and work on beautiful Darrumbal country. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and to those still emerging. I promise to walk softly on this land with respects to the spirits, the ancestors, and for all First Nations people. I'd like to acknowledge all First Nations people in attendance today. I'd also like to acknowledge all folk who have their own significant lived experience, and to pay respects to the giants who came before us, blazing these trails and upon whose shoulders we now stand. So before we get into the guts of it, language, as you're all aware, in this space is evolving and will continue to change over time. There are also different terms that are used in different settings and countries. For the national guidelines, we put out a survey and got people's preferences on the way that they wanted to talk about things. One thing that was a directive from the National Mental Health Commission was that we needed to cover both the personal or consumer and the family care workforces. And the term lived experience workforce is used at times as an umbrella, but it's also made clear repeatedly within the guidelines that these are also separate workforces. So you don't have to listen to me the whole time. I may ask people just to read from the screen every now and again. So again, please be brave and feel free to do that. It really adds to the experience. So why are we here? Why does this matter? Being aware of the key information in the national guidelines is a critical next step, as Paula mentioned, for anyone working in or allied with lived experience. But it's also critical for anyone in senior leadership positions within organisations and departments across the sector, as well as for funders and policymakers. Why this is so important for everyone across the sector should, I hope, become more obvious as the presentation continues, but essentially these policy documents provide critical understanding and the ability to advocate effectively on behalf of the lived experience workforce, which in turn is essential in progressing the national reform agenda. All right, we've got our first screen. Who's the bravest of the bunch? Who's going to read this one out? There's some extroverts in this group. I know it. I know you people.
I'm happy to read it, Lou.
Thank you.
A resource for change. Lived experience workers provide a resource for change. The personal and social change that provides the necessary foundation for individual recovery, and the cultural and practice change that can move healthcare services toward recovery-orientated practice.
Thanks very much, Helly. So, given that it has been signed off at all levels of government and is a direct action of the 5th National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Plan, the guidelines are the most important, as in the most authoritative policy document we've had to date. They help explain the importance of the work, as well as ensuring it is meaningfully embedded across the sector. The guidelines position lived experience workers as key to the effective implementation of a recovery-oriented, person-directed system of care, which has become increasingly relevant to all of us with each national plan, standard and policy, and is taking such a central position in recent developments like the Victorian Royal Commission and the Productivity Commission report. In the preface pages, so just briefly, before we get into it, one of the main reasons for this is whilst my team and I did lead the research and the writing, the final sprucing and design of the document was given to somebody else. What they took out is like a formal contents page or pages. And because of that, we just thought it was particularly useful to help give people some navigation. So some sense of what's in the document and where. And after these sessions finish in the next few weeks or months, maybe, I'm going to just put together a couple of pages which do just give you the basic content and the page number, just so to make it a little bit easier for folks to find their way around. So in the preface pages of the document, the principles of the guidelines are explained as engaging all stakeholders in equal and respectful partnership for all aspects of workforce development to ensure lived experience workforce development is both effective and meaningful. It's about maintaining the integrity of lived experience work by ensuring that all work is consistent with the values, the principles of lived experience work, and develops from its strong foundations in the consumer movement. It's about creating the conditions for a thriving workforce by developing flexible, recovery-oriented workplaces where lived experience workers are enabled to achieve in their professional roles with, and this is exciting, flow-on benefits for the whole workforce, as well as service users and their family, friends, and significant others. It's also about responding to diversity by engaging with diverse communities to ensure that all aspects of service delivery meet their needs, and by employing a lived experience workforce that reflects the diversity of service users, their family, and significant others. It's about ensuring lived experience workers are not ever placed in positions where they are expected to support coercive or restrictive practice. And in fact, it's about working in collaboration with lived experience workers to progress the articulated national reform goal of moving towards elimination of coercion and restrictive practice. It's about finally supporting systemic change by identifying areas of lived experience workforce development for prioritization in funding, policy, planning, and service commissioning. So in addition to those key principles underpinning the guidelines, there's also some priorities or assumptions. These priorities broadly encompass or point to the more specific actions that are identified in the planning section later on. Now, we weren't allowed to call those actions recommendations, but between you and me and the gatepost, they're recommendations. So these priorities set up those recommendations later. Priority 1 establishes that the lived experience workforce is essential to the development of truly recovery-oriented care and needs to be acknowledged as central rather than as an option or an add-on. To achieve that centrality, the support of employers and colleagues is needed, and that support can be gained by increasing shared understanding of lived experience work and its unique contribution and potential benefits. Priority 2 acknowledges that safety, training, and support recognition underpin a thriving workforce. So a key action of this priority is to ensure people employed in lived experience roles are able to thrive by creating adequate and appropriate employment conditions, just like any other career. Priority 3 further acknowledges that lived experience workers are needed everywhere, at all levels in service delivery and decision making, and across diverse communities. A key action of this priority is to proactively support growth in the lived experience workforce in terms of the breadth of employment opportunities, as well as diversity in the workforce, including leadership roles. Oh, sorry, it's a bit preemptive. Priority 4 recommends the development of community-based step care in every region, including lived experience led and lived experience delivered services. So a key action to support this priority is to increase the integration of lived experience-led services and co-delivered peer support services into regional healthcare systems, ensuring that everyone has access to care that supports recovery and comes from a lived experience perspective, including people in rural and remote areas, as well as people from diverse communities. I say this every time, but as somebody living in a region, in a rural area, I see how desperately we need this priority and this action to be spelled out, because while there are some incredible areas of best practice in our metropolitan centres, we still have next to nothing in many of our more regional areas. So that's an area that really needs a great deal of development. Priority 5 is the final one, and it emphasises investment in both the personal and family carer lived experience workforces in the form of national professional peak bodies. Now, this is a total no-brainer because it's so critical, given there are no formal industrial relations or advocacy bodies currently representing these workforces, which of course has led to a continuation of ad hoc and unregulated employment conditions. Now we're ready for the next slide. So the national guidelines, the guts of it, that was just sort of the preface pages. And then the actual core content is separated into sections and chapters that focus on understanding the work, stages of lived experience workforce development, and planning and supporting reform. So I'll provide detail on all of those things eventually, but initially, just in the preface pages, along with what I just explained, there's also some information on language and definitions used within the document. Then we get into the chapter on understanding. This chapter is so rich in information, like truly every 1 to 2 pages dives into something absolutely essential. And it really is foundational information that should inform the development and ongoing development of any lived experience workforce, funding guidelines or policy. It includes information on the unique benefits of lived experience work, where it came from, including having a trauma-informed human rights perspective, why it's so important, particularly in the context of losing self-agency and needing to learn how to redefine ourselves and our experiences in ways that are more helpful to us, how it's different than traditional mental health disciplines, the unique skills, knowledge, abilities, and attributes that we bring, and what it is about our unique way of viewing and doing that is so effective. It's also details on the values that underpin the work and the principles that guide our work. One of the many sections in this first chapter that is really important, and this one is actually a fairly new area. We started to look at the similarities and differences between the personal or the consumer and the family care workforces. So this is just a really small snapshot, and there's more in the document, of course, but basically roles informed by personal experience were defined as having first-hand experiences and perspectives of mental health challenges, service use, and diagnoses. Often first-hand experiences of loss of personal freedom and identity. People in these roles worked primarily with people accessing services, had a greater emphasis on personal autonomy, and a greater focus on confidentiality, as well as a greater emphasis on the individual process of healing and recovery. roles informed by family or carer perspectives were found to draw on experiences and perspectives of witnessing, walking beside, and supporting another person. These roles worked primarily with family or significant others of people accessing services, were more likely at times to experience complexity in questions of safety and risk versus autonomy and choice, and held a greater emphasis on relational recovery, i.e. a family inclusive approach to recovery. There's more, as I said, on the similarities. There's also a little bit on the emergence in some areas of what people are calling combined roles. Now, just as a spoiler alert, due to the differences identified, but the lack of specific training to help people move from one perspective to another, the guidelines strongly recommends that combined roles are not developed at this time and that the role should be either one or the other, and to always be very clear on what perspective particular roles are informed by and be very transparent about this to people accessing services and their supporters. I think maybe somebody's mic might be on, just if you don't mind everybody having a wee little check and turning it off if it is. So moving on, there's so much in this first chapter. It really is, it's exciting and it's rich, and I do recommend that particularly folks like yourselves who create and have opportunity to advocate, that you're aware of this, just to point other people towards this information in the guidelines, and to use the authority the guidelines has to underpin people understanding our work more thoroughly. So specializations, of course, are still relatively new in the designated workforce, but they're also highly valued as they acknowledge intersectionality and increase the relevance of support for people from diverse backgrounds, identifications, and experiences. As with all lived experience workforce development, the development of specialist roles and/or services must be led by lived experience leaders and workers who have those specific experiences, identifications, and backgrounds. Specialist roles and services must also be guided by the existing knowledge and values of the wider community, the lived experience community and the consumer movement, and be defined by an experience of both mental health challenge or supporting someone with mental health challenge, as well as whatever the specialist area is. I would say at this point that it's strongly and frequently repeated throughout the document that lived experience leadership of everything to do with us, including research, training, education, professionalization, what have you, must be lived experience led. And that while effective co-production, and I will emphasize effective co-production, is very important and a frequent feature of lived experience work practice, as a still emerging discipline, we also need time to develop and define things for ourselves without influence from any other disciplines, particularly as every other discipline is more established, has greater presence in the workforce typically, and definitely has greater power, particularly in mainstream services, which of course can lead to lived experience workers feeling pressured to agree and align with those more dominant perspectives. I would also just say the reason that we're so clear about specializations needing both mental health as well as whatever the specialization is, experiences that unfortunately in some areas only one or the other is being honoured. And of course, that means that a critical piece of knowledge is missing from people's arsenal, from their, from their skill set. And that's something that it's really good to be aware of if you are involved in advising on specialist services, to make sure that the organisation, that the employers are aware of that. Allies. So allies who help champion the lived experience workforce are absolutely acknowledged as essential. They're a central point of effective workforce development. The guidelines give some specific actions for allies in different settings and job roles so that it's more specific to certain sectors, including colleagues, people in management or governance roles, as well as funding bodies and policymakers. But it also includes, as on the screen, a few broad actions that can assist allies across any role or setting. The first chapter also looks at the position requirements and the need for designated lived experience positions for lived experience workers and defining what really creates meaningful co-production. In a nutshell, meaningful co-production includes the need to share power and make space for lived experience leadership, ensuring that all parties feel valued and have the skills and confidence to contribute fully. The document also talks about co-production in the mental health sector between service providers and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and communities, and how important it is for service providers to be culturally competent. Which leads us to diversity and inclusion, which of course has already been mentioned a few times, and within the sections of the document is mentioned very many times. So there are a range of strategies throughout the document to ensure proactive attention is paid to creating a more diverse and inclusive lived experience workforce. Diverse perspectives informing the work were a key consideration from the outset. And if you're interested in that process or the engagement process more broadly, if you go to one of the appendixes, anyway, the appendix section of the guidelines, we really were very transparent about this process. Just a few key issues for your information today. We had folks on the steering committee, as well as the project team, as well as participants in focus groups and interviews representing a range of perspectives, including First Nations advisors, people identifying as LGBTQIA+, as well as people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, people with disability, and a whole range of other specific experiences, backgrounds, and identifications. We particularly on the research team had folks, First Nations advisors, people identifying as LGBTQIA+, and culturally and linguistically diverse researchers at all stages, from concept design all the way through to the very final draft that we handed back to the Commission, which we felt was extremely important. At the beginning of the document, there's a dedication to all the forerunners who gave so much of themselves to truly allow us to do what we can do today. There's also, and I mean, I must say, some of those forerunners are still very much active and in fact in the audience today. So there's also an acknowledgement and commitment to First Nations peoples, perspectives and priorities. Throughout the document, there's an emphasis on understanding the intergenerational impacts of trauma, social determinants, and understanding that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have distinct cultures and often view mental health from a vastly different perspective than mainstream services, a perspective that encompasses the cultural, spiritual, physical, emotional, and mental well-being of the individual, family, and community. Again, we're still in chapter 1. I really cannot stress how rich this section is in terms of data. In further explaining the unique features of the work, there's detail on the values and the principles that inform it. Here's just a little snapshot on the screen of the values. Lived experience work, as of course all of you know, is values-based, with values acknowledged as the pillars that inform lived experience practice. Ultimately, lived experience work is distinguished not so much by what we do, but how we do it. It's the how that is guided by lived experience principles and values. There's more information in the document on these values and principles, which were developed by reviewing existing literature, quite a lot of research that my team and I did prior, as well as extensive engagement with the Australian Lived Experience workforce for this particular project. Now, there's also a companion document, Lived Experience Roles, a practical guide to designing and developing lived experience positions, which is a really useful, practical tool to help further guide the development of specific position descriptions across a range of position types, and is really good to point employers towards. In this first section, there's also really valuable information about the uniqueness of lived experience roles, how they differ from other mental health professions. And an important issue is raised in relation to the emotional labour of the work. As everyone here I'm sure knows, lived experience roles, particularly peer support positions, we often have to revisit some of the most traumatic experiences of our lives in order to connect and empathise to create rapport with people accessing services. This takes time to recover from. Employers need to understand that alongside the unique benefits of this work is the potentially draining nature of what makes the work unique and beneficial. As a result, work planning for lived experience positions must allow time between appointments, regular and easily accessible debriefing, and generally understanding that this is taxing stuff, and to aim for quality interactions over quantity. Again, this is a really good section, I think, for many folks who are working in organisation to point people towards in understanding how to design work for lived experience folk. We've got another quote. Who's the next brave cab off the rank?
I'll do it if you like.
Thanks, babe.
Regardless of the role and position, lived experience work focuses on how lived experience is collectively understood and applied to benefit others and used to contribute to system change. Importantly, organisational support enhances the efficacy of lived experience work, allowing this potential for contributing to system change and advocacy to be realised.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Repeatedly, the guidelines make clear that lived experience roles, regardless of position type or level of authority, are distinguished by a commitment to using lived experience to benefit others, uphold human rights, and achieve systems transformation. Lived experience workers are clearly identified as change agents, actively contributing to ongoing transformation of service design and delivery. It's also acknowledged that this may take on an added layer of responsibility and drive for change for lived experience workers in representative roles from diverse cultures and communities, including folks from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, culturally and linguistically diverse, and LGBTQIA+ communities. And it's time for the first question and/or comment break. So I'll hand it over to whoever has the most burning question and/or comment.
There's lots of comments, and I'm just can't get my little scrolly thing to work. So I've just popped in a few key links just for everyone's info, and Faye suggests, or I think Faye suggested just to pop it into an email, so I've sent that out to people. Yeah, I'm just going through. Anyone got anything? I'm just having a look through.
There will be, just if you're feeling like not, like often people don't ask questions or comments now, that's fine. There's two other points, and I do still have all the stages of development to get through. But Liz has got her hand up. Go for it.
Oh, go, Liz.
Oh, sorry, Elsa, I missed you. But definitely.
Oh, I'm not doing my job, am I, Lou? I should be monitoring this.
I don't know whose job it is, Paula, but no one was doing it.
Do you want me, Paula, do you want me to do that if you're doing
please.
something else?
Yes, please, Faye.
All right, sure. So, yeah, I also had a really important comment there.
Hi, I was just wondering, when it comes to human rights and us reducing the coercion and restrictive practices, why didn't you go for elimination, Louise?
No, what we did, Elsa, we say, yeah, so, and I would say that the guts of the stuff around coercion and restrictive practice isn't in that first section. So I've made reference to it with the principles, but that's actually in the stages of development, which is more you stepping your organisation through. But yeah, absolutely. The way that it's framed in the principles is around how it's supporting that nationally identified goal of elimination. The language is probably a bit firmer once you get into it, and for different reasons because of who the audience is. But absolutely, that it's very clear that it's in support of elimination.
Thank you.
But you also raised about the psychiatrists saying that they have lived experience.
Yes, the World Federation, I believe, is whether the psychiatrist has a personal experience of the diagnosis or not, they're using that their lived experience to not include consumers, as we would call them.
Okay, sure. So the document is incredibly clear that, one, there is a difference between being in a designated lived experience role and being in any other role and having a lived experience. And that is not what we are talking about here. It also further goes into some detail around senior lived experience roles. So I would classify a psychiatrist as a senior role. It does list a whole bunch of things, including research, education and training, any kind of management position, that people cannot be employed to a senior lived experience role as an entry-level position, as in, if you're coming out for the first time to take on that senior role, you're coming out too late. If it's not on your CV already, if you cannot demonstrate that you have work history in this space and a deep understanding of the discipline of lived experience, then you're not appropriate for those kinds of roles. So I guess there's two things there. One is that in I think it's in the chapter 1, it's either in chapter 1 or in the preface, but I'll make sure I put it in that, that few page handout thing that I'm making. It defines designated lived experience roles as opposed to people who may happen to have a lived experience. And it also makes clear a number of times in the document what is required to be appropriate for employment in a senior position, and that means having appropriate work history, just like any other discipline. You can't imagine the chief psychiatrist being some green kid who's just finished their bloody, degree. And in the same way, you can't be giving senior positions to people who are coming out with a lived experience for the first time because it's a better pay packet. No, thank you. So, yeah.
It'd be great to have it on that that 4-pager that you're talking about. Yeah. Liz, you were talking about family carer-based framework to be acknowledged in position descriptions.
Oh, that was a long time ago.
Right.
That was about 45 minutes ago. My question is much more current.
Yeah.
Just a bit, Liz, before you do though, the carer family peer or lived experience workforce has come up as needing some additional information, additional work done on it, and Lou, myself and a few others are trying to work, to get something happening in that space. So yeah, but sorry, Liz.
No, be happy to help, Paula. We're doing it as part of the development of the framework at Wesley Mission, Queensland. Been a work in progress for more than 2 years. We're now at the point where we're writing our framework, both for the workforce development, the new position descriptions that reflect the guidelines, and a statement about the role of supervision, external lived experience supervision.
Yes.
So, Louise, my first question to you would be, rather than just constantly saying, see the national guidelines, because I don't want to paraphrase what's been written so well for the sake of having that same information in an organisational document. I'm leaning towards us having a take on it that comes from an organisational perspective and reflects the work that we do and how we sit in alignment with those national documents. Would you see that as being a viable use of the guidelines? They've been absolutely vital in terms of looking at the position descriptions, and our HR rep on the co-design project group now refers to that before she refers to any organisational document.
Wow.
I would say that's the best thing I've heard all week, Liz. Yeah, look, that's always been my hope, is that people will use it to individually advocate with. But gosh, if organisations are basing or reviewing their workforce planning for lived experience, using the best practice evidence that we have from the guidelines, gosh, that's just the best thing you could possibly tell me, and that's wonderful. And absolutely, it needs to be specific to the organisation. And I guess in a way, that's the document is long, the guidelines are long. Some people didn't like that, but if you go through it, it's really nothing I feel we could have left out, to be honest, because every single thing that's in there is an issue for somebody somewhere. And if we didn't put it there, it's no, people don't have the ability to sort of point to it. But of course, when you take that and you turn it into what's specific for your organization, you can leave out the bits that you don't need, and you can make sure that it's tailored to be as useful as possible. But Liz has disappeared.
Liz disappeared, but
I've answered that question.
I think I have to disappear and get a tissue. That's made me really emotional, you saying that, Liz. Like, how long have we been waiting to be able to speak sentences like that,
Yeah.
And look, I have to acknowledge the commitment of the organisation. The State Manager for Mental Health, no sooner had Louise produced the Queensland framework, they were actually using that document to plan how the organisation was going to respond. So it was in January this year that we started looking at the national guidelines and how do we make sure that what we're doing aligns and serves the sustainability of good lived experience workforce members. We don't want to see people leaving our organisation for conditions that are better elsewhere. We want them to feel that they are in the best place.
I've got goosebumps, Liz. That's amazing.
So I think that 4-pager, Lou, is really important, because busy service personnel don't read anything bigger than something they can read in one toilet sitting,
Yes.
We did have chapters like contents in there, but I think somebody with much fancier design aesthetics than I have was the final say. So apparently they don't like indexes or contents pages. Paula, you've got your hand up. Did you want to?
Oh, look, I probably got caught up in the emotion and feel a bit like Faye does at the moment. But I know that with the Queensland framework, good on you, Liz. My biggest, I guess, disappointment is that it was commissioned by the Commission. This is Paula's perspective, not PHN, so I don't lose my job. But my biggest issue with that was that there were, it was finished, but where was the resourcing to implement it and walk the talk? And we're now quite a few years later. It has, the likes of Wesley who have picked it up and run with it. That's awesome. I've more recently, well, two things. A positive thing is with the work that I do with the 31 PHNs around Australia, in 2018, there was only 2 identified lived experience positions within the 31 PHNs. We're now up to 9. So that's, it's been slowly chipping away. The sad thing is, is that, well, it's been good because I've been able to refer directly to the national guidelines, because sometimes an organisation will plateau a little bit, think that they're doing a really good job, but then plateau. And having been in this position for like 6 years now, where I do account for about 10-20% max on organisational stuff, but the rest is authentic working with the lens. And I've noticed over the years that some of that generic organisational stuff encroaching on the actual reason I was employed. So I've reminded them, been reminding them and referencing the national guidelines for that. So that's just thought I'd share that. But yeah, now I've got to figure out how to take my hand down.
Thank you, Paula. I might move on if that's okay, and there'll be a chance for questions later. Nobody else has got their hand up right now, but the next stage of the guidelines is the key developmental stages. So one of the briefs that we were given was that they didn't want people, organisations in states, territories or settings that had very little experience with lived experience workforce development to feel intimidated. So whilst the Queensland framework, obviously we took a best practice or benchmarking kind of approach, This needed to appeal to and speak to and feel inclusive of organisations at any stage. So we sort of came up with these phased stages of development. Now, this is a section of the document is predominantly aimed at organisations employing or wanting to employ lived experience workers, but funders also really need to be familiar with these stages to ensure that funding guidelines reflect the actual needs and strategies that support workforce development. It's also, this section is really practical and gives step-by-step strategies to build an effective lived experience workforce. So the stages are grouped into preparation or laying strong foundations, implementation or growing the lived experience workforce, and transformation, when of course we know the lived experience workforce will be accepted as essential to service and systems transformation by all. Central to the first two developmental stages, preparation and implementation, is the need for organisational and sector management to understand and consequently value authentic lived experience work and approaches. Anybody who's read any of my research before, and particularly the Queensland framework, will be familiar with this diagram or something similar. So in all the research, we've discovered very strongly that exposure to lived experience work and concepts for senior and executive management leads to increased understanding, then a higher perceived value of the work. As a result of this understanding and valuing, there's increased commitment from leadership. This then leads to practical steps being taken to support the development of the lived experience or peer workforce. Strategies to increase exposure and understanding centre on building lived experience literacy and relationships. This includes building relationships with lived experience leaders, lived experience-led organisations, lived experience-led services, peak bodies, networks. It's also about referring to lived experience sources of information, including lived experience-led research and industry documents. Now, whilst that senior leadership buy-in really is critical and you can't do without it, you need whoever's at the top of the pile to be as on board and to understand as much as possible. The whole of workforce actually needs to be committed and on board. So an effective whole of workforce commitment is needed. Building broader support for lived experience work is fostered when that valuing is widely communicated to every level of the sector and or individual organisations. And when lived experience workers engage with other health professionals, they need to experience equity and acceptance. That might sound like a no-brainer. You would think that that is something that any employee is going to get. Well, not if you lived experience and not if you're not very lucky. So this whole section is really about whole of workforce understanding and commitment and how essential it is to build that acceptance and effective collaboration between designated lived experience and non-designated colleagues. Without building that understanding, that commitment, that collaboration, the guidelines are clear that the potential benefits of lived experience work are restricted and acceptance and equity for the roles is compromised, which of course is completely unacceptable for any employment situation. Next, the document drills down into what a whole of workplace approach to commitment looks like at both the preparation and implementation stages and the strategies that are needed. So significantly, lived experience roles and values need to be integral to organisational policy and practice, including the mission statement. Now, I found this interesting. It wasn't until we did the big US study that we realised how important it was for lived experience to be very clearly identified as central to the organisation in the mission statement, and for that mission statement to be actively used in everybody's work, in the staff meetings, referred to frequently. I thought that was a really exciting new piece of information that I hadn't thought of before. As many of you will be aware, pretty much all my research does is take what you and I know anecdotally, go through the research hoops, turn it into evidence, publish it in the journals, so we can then say, no, it's not just my opinion. Look, It's scientific. This is empirical. This is evidence-based. But this was one of those times when the data took me by surprise, and I was excited to learn how impactful having lived experience featured and central in the mission statement could be. In the document, there's also a distinction drawn between including lived experience roles, which normally equates to lived experience being expected to fit into the existing culture, and what we're aiming for, which is embedding lived experience roles to work authentically with philosophical and financial investment from the organisation, as well as top-down and bottom-up championing from allies at all levels. Now, within the stages of development section of the document, there are lists of additional helpful resources, training and guides, other external sources that can be accessed to help progress organisational commitment strategies and whatever section it is that you're reading. So the guidelines is not just self-referential, it will send you out for other pieces of information or spaces that might be helpful. Organisational strategies, just quickly, is about demonstrating that valuing of lived experience work, and the valuing being included not only in the mission statement, but across organisational policies, having that championship, as I mentioned before, at all levels of the organisation, philosophical commitment to lived experience, but also to lived experience values, including being recovery-oriented, person-directed. It's also about financial investments, including adequate numbers of designated lived experience staff. One of the participants, again in the US study, had the beautiful quote, "Put your money where your mouth is." I love that. I just think it's succinct, but it does say a lot. Other strategies, employment of senior lived experience roles, which of course assist to preserve the integrity of the work, promote and guide lived experience workforce development, provide career pathways so we don't have brain drain, as Liz was mentioning before, losing talented people. And also provides links to the wider community and the wider thinking. Role clarity needs to be addressed in a range of ways, including the senior roles, but also everyone around them, including HR, management and colleagues, understanding and valuing, maintaining the authenticity of the role, ensuring adequate lived experience-led supervision, creating effective lived experience-informed recruitment strategies, providing role-specific training for lived experience workers, and this is important, designing meaningful position descriptions and getting the right person for the job. Professional development for lived experience staff also needs to be budgeted for and include appropriate training, networks, and supervision. Again, I don't need to tell you guys how often that is left off the list. Workplace culture is so critical and needs to be addressed as ongoing. One of the most shocking things that I've seen in the research was we went to one organisation who's very celebrated for their peer workforce, but it's a multidisciplinary organisation, and they thought they'd done their peer integration or whatever and just sort of left it at that. 10 years, whatever it was later, when I went to yarn with them, the peers were very distressed. Their role in the organisation had been diminished, and other folk within the organisation also agreed and could see that things had gone very much backwards. We dug into this a bit more, and what we found was that workplace culture resets itself. You can't just do that work of accepting and valuing and understanding lived experience work once and think that it's done. It needs to be revisited. It needs to include training, lived experience-led training on the value and uniqueness of lived experience perspective from orientation on. It also needs to be revisited annually like any other type of training. There needs to be opportunities to develop mutual understanding and respect between the different role types, including non-designated and designated. And of course, and this is so crucial, making sure HR is on board and working on lived experience informed policies and processes. Education and training, the revisited education and training should also include cultural capacity building to increase the perceived value of diversity across the workforce. Additionally, it's important, I laugh every time I read this one out, it's important people accessing services, their family and significant others are told about lived experience work and given pathways to access it, because unfortunately, sometimes people forget, or the organisation does not plan to make sure that everyone accessing the services is aware that there are lived experience roles available. So it's really crucial. Finally, in terms of the strategies, there needs to be specific and additional training for whole of workforce, including lived experience in voluntary and in rural and areas where there's less development and or special needs and different circumstances. Now, I want also to add here that whilst there's a lot of mention of professionalisation in the document, and in fact, it seems to have occurred a little bit more since we handed it over, we made very clear, and there are a number of places in the document, I've got the page number somewhere, actually I can find this for you, but it makes very clear that professionalisation needs to ensure multiple pathways to employment are maintained, rather than focusing on mandatory tertiary qualifications. Now, as a person with a brain injury who struggles, like if you can give me a one-page form and on the wrong day, I'm going to be literally curled up under my desk crying because I'm just going to find it too difficult to deal with. Making sure that multiple pathways are maintained ensures that people who have education disruption, as so many of us do, or other barriers like brain injury or literacy, language or aptitude for formal study, but still have the appropriate work skills or personal qualities, are not excluded from the lived experience workforce. This is something I'm personally very passionate about, and I know too many people who are wonderful at what they do, particularly in peer support positions, who would struggle if we went for those mandatory qualifications. And so it's something I want you all to be aware of, and I will find those page numbers before the end if you like, or it'll be on that 4-pager I send out anyway. Additionally, now I know I answered this a bit in the question, but this is the official take on senior roles. I'm just going to run through this really quickly. Senior leadership roles can't be treated as an entry point to lived experience work. It should be clear from the CV that they have the specific experience and understanding of the lived experience discipline that you would expect from someone being employed in a senior or leadership position for any other mental health profession, not coming out for the first time professionally to take on a senior role. And we explain that this is because those roles are key to help guide lived experience workforce development, provide role clarity, protect the authenticity of the work. They're also essential in communicating the uniqueness of the work to others. If people in these roles do not have prior employment and lived experience roles and or can demonstrate advanced knowledge of the discipline via other channels, the depth of their understanding of the workforce challenges and needs and their ability to therefore provide guidance on authenticity and role clarity is diminished or not at all. And there are massive impacts for all lived experience employees, as well as the potential benefits of the work. And it's time for questions and comments.
So there's a few comments in there about a peak body for the lived experience workforce. Did you want to speak to that, Louise? Or?
Sure. That's one of our major recommendations. And in fact, that there needs to be 2 peak bodies, one for the personal consumer workforce and one for the family carer workforce, to be fair to both. And it couldn't be clearer, particularly we're going to get, so we've just looked at the middle section of the document. Soon we'll be getting to the recommendations, or as they're called, I think they're called, I don't know what they're called, they're recommendations anyway, and I will get to that a little bit more then. So we might just leave that one if that's okay and cover it in a moment.
We might have more chance of getting it happening again if Mark Butler does end up our minister, because it was him that was behind the funding for the CRG that we were on before, trying to get the peak body up.
Robert's got a hand up.
G'day.
Oh, sorry, Rob.
No worries. I don't get to say g'day that much. It's exciting. I was asking Faye a question in the chat. She said it's probably a good question to ask. Is there much happening in the forensic peer support lived experience workforce world in Aussie?
Is there much happening, sorry, in the
forensics?
Sorry, I'm not catching that word just before. The something peer support area.
Forensic, criminal justice.
Oh, forensic. Yeah, thanks, Robin. I rely a lot on lip reading and recognizing words. So if I'm not expecting one, it can throw me. there is some stuff happening. Tim Heffernan is involved with some of that. I can't really speak to that. I'll just say Paula might be able to, if she's still about, might be able to. But look, I would say in a nutshell, I don't know of anything sort of on this scale that specifically looks at the forensic space, but I do believe that forensic care in New South Wales, that I know that they are looking to build their lived experience workforce. I know that they have a peer workforce guidelines. That's probably the extent of my knowledge. And I do think that both Tim Heffernan and Leanne Crace was the author, and Tim Heffernan was very involved with that. Elsa may have her hand up to add to that.
I'd be looking at, yes, those two as well. Also, if you add Stephen Caruana on your socials, you'll see some stuff. Nimai has is building peer networks, I believe.
In the
But,
forensic system?
Yeah, I believe so.
Right. So Flourish, we have a peer worker in, we've been contracted to have peer workers in the forensic system in Sydney, but it certainly needs more. I understand that in Victoria, they've been advertising around that space. So that's would be great if that happens. So, but they need so many more.
Huge area that needs further direction. Oh, Elsa, yeah.
I was also wondering about supervision of all disciplines by a peer supervisor. So psychiatrists having some sort of cultural and check-ins to make sure that they're recovery focused. Have we got anything like that in the documents?
No, but I wish we did now. That's a really great point. We've got a bit, we do have stuff around training, not supervision. So we've got stuff around lived experience-led training for all staff. And we emphasise lived experience leadership and recovery. And it's a natural extension to look at supervision, but we just didn't think of it in time. But yeah, very, very clever. I'm gonna put that in my own brainsicle, and I'll look for an opportunity to put that out there.
Paula, is it in your LHD, somebody of us older advocates is giving supervision to clinical staff? Is it in your patch, Paula? Are you there?
I might have had to step out. Sorry, I should have said that before. She did mention to me that she might be having to go in and out a wee bit today. Okay. So yeah.
Okay. Paula also mentioned that it's interesting to watch what is happening in Victoria post-Royal Commission of Inquiry and the creation of senior positions within Victoria Health. Lots of learnings. Queensland just needs a similar injection of new funding. I think that's the thing. And I think in talking with Mary, she and Catherine, her boss, the bigwig, are very aware that all eyes are on Victoria, and it's not just that what they're doing there, they're not just doing for Victoria, the poor buggers, they're doing for all of us, and they know that eyes are on them, and that's just a whole lot of extra attention for them, apart from what they've obviously got, that the government's putting pressure on to do it yesterday rather than tomorrow.
That's very true, Faye. If there's nothing else, I'll keep moving. Nobody else's hands up. But
I'm just checking if there's something else. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. There is more opportunity for questions later. So yeah.
Paula says through the National PHN MHLEEN and partnership with the National Mental Health Consumer Care Forum and LEELAN, we have been working on some leadership projects. One being scoping training and career paths and gaps. And you can write to MHLEEN at brisbanenorthphn.org.au.
Very cool.
Okay, you're underwater. Alsa says, Lou, you occasionally sound like you're underwater. It's just the bandwidth, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll slow down. That's probably the best I can do. We've had a lot of storm activity in Queensland. Sorry about that, guys. Not much I can do about that, unfortunately. Cool. All right. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. And if you if you miss my meaning because that bandwidth, that issue happens for too long, just interrupt me. Tell me to say it again, okay? So at the mature stages of workforce development, effective lived experience practice and principles will be identified or are identified as contributing to transformational change within individual organizations and the sector. The transformation helps actualize key reform priorities, particularly better understanding and implementation of recovery-oriented and person-directed approaches. Additionally, at mature stages, greater whole of workforce benefits are increasingly evident, providing a more accepting work culture for all staff. I'm excited about this. As you'll all know, one of our big barriers is attitudes. In fact, it's our biggest barrier, other people's beliefs about us. So one of the big things I've really focused on in the research that I've led is how do we address those barriers? One of the barriers I think that we hear a lot is, well, one, what about me? I've got a lived experience too. Why aren't they talking to me? And the other one is, you know, what about my perspective, regardless of whether I've got a lived experience or not? And, you know, what about employment conditions for me? So I think this has answered it really well, because what the research has discovered is, one, that organically, just by existing within a workforce, when there are lived experience workers, the organisation naturally starts to look at flexibility for other workers. So flexibility within the workforce becomes a flow-on benefit for other folks. Yay! Then the other thing that actually surprised me, because I was expecting to see that employment of lived experience workers would also challenge, you know, discriminatory or prejudicial attitudes towards folk. It did not, unless people were intentional. There was the intentional use of lived experience roles to challenge those attitudes. So just having the lived experience workers did not do, but having the lived experience workers and using those roles in a range of ways did do. So we've got a little bit of stuff about that in the document. I've also got a paper out about that already. Yeah, I've got a paper out about that already. We'll come to that later. But yeah, I just thought that was so great, because, you know, we can talk about, oh, lived experience work is, you know, beneficial to everyone. And some of the other benefits we found for colleagues in other mental health professions is that they found they were more able to focus on their discipline-specific skills rather than having to be a jack of all trades. That, again, they increased their recovery understanding. The therapeutic relationship building became, you know, better, and they understood people better, all that sort of thing. But at a personal level, to hear that their work experience can improve and that they can work within a more human-friendly environment, that's a good sales point. That's what I think. So anyway, at this transformational change, or this mature stage, lived experience workforce will be successfully understood, accepted and embedded across all levels of the sector and individual organisations. The mature stages is a shorter section. It includes some areas for continued development, as well as some indicators that demonstrate lived experience workforce development is established and sustainable. That's important. All right, so now we move on to the recommendations, or as we were told to call them, the planning and supporting mental health reform section. This final section is essentially the key recommendations, as I've said so many times, and how we hope this document will push lived experience workforce development forward in more supported and sustainable ways, with an emphasis, as always, on maintaining the integrity of the work. I've got a slide coming up. Who's feeling brave? Who's going to read it for me?
I will. Achieving change in mental health services and systems will take time. To be effective, the lived experience workforce needs to be sustained for the long term. The development of funding, policy and service planning approaches that are able to support lived experience workforce development is both an immediate need and an ongoing commitment.
Brilliant. Thank you, Elsa. So I strongly encourage everyone, even if you don't read any other section, please do read the Planning and Supporting Mental Health Reform section. It's only 6 pages long. It includes most of the big ticket priorities for our workforces moving forward. It includes recommendations for the lived experience workforce, funders, those commissioning services, as well as higher education bodies, other mental health professions and employers. Given, as I've said before, this document has been signed off by all levels of government, this can be a powerful advocacy tool for the key areas identified. The more people like yourselves are aware and raising your voice, the more effective we can collectively be. I'll just go a few of the priorities here. The goals, as it says on the screen, are to educate by investing, and I will just say, we really strongly emphasize whole of sector investment. None of this little bit over here, little bit over there nonsense. We need systemic support for this. So one of the things that we're advocating for in this section is whole of sector education, including education for funders, policymakers, sector leaders, to explain the uniqueness and the value of the personal and family care and lived experience workforces, and to ensure service design and funding decisions are based on a clear understanding of lived experience work. It's about engaging higher education and mental health professional bodies, embedding understanding of the uniqueness and the value of lived experience work, personal recovery, and person-directed approaches in all accredited and ongoing professional development and tertiary qualifications. There is almost no point in doing all this work within the workforce if we cannot get our mental health professional bodies and higher education to come on board with this. We need generations of new clinicians, new mental health professions, allied health professionals coming out with an understanding of lived experience, with valuing lived experience, with being used to hearing from lived experience perspectives, and of understanding and valuing recovery concepts from a lived experience lens. At the moment, we're doing a pretty ordinary job of that across the country. And so this is a real rally call for mental health professions and higher education to really make this a priority, because we have been fluffing around with reform in this country since what, 1992. Let's make something real happen, people. And we know that the missing link has been lived experience. So the missing link in your courses, in your re-education and your training is also lived experience, and we need that to happen. I don't care about this, obviously. I'm not the least bit passionate about that. But the other things that we're looking at is establishing data collection mechanisms to measure success and opportunities for ongoing development, as well as enabling networking, professional learning and development opportunities, expanding career pathways, and providing a wide range of education and training options, whilst always maintaining multiple pathways to employment. Now, look, that's the end of the national guidelines, but if you don't mind, I would really like to share with you another piece that you can draw on. Many of you will have heard me speak before about how frustrated I get about research. It's all well and good to go out and create evidence, and then it's locked up behind paywalls. And unless you're enrolled at or working for a university, or you've got like bucket loads of money, then you cannot afford to access it. Our workforce, more than anyone, needs access to everything that comes out. So some of my colleagues that I work with frequently, who worked on the Queensland framework and the national guidelines with me and we've created a translation website to allow greater accessibility of the research. So it provides a range of resources, including short plain language summaries of the 13 or so year program of research I've led into the development of the lived experience workforce. It's also another way to advocate for the same issues. But in some ways, it's easier to find what you're looking for. I would never encourage you to not use the national guidelines because they've got more authority in many ways, but you can dive into this website and find specific sections more easily because it's split up into like key issues or into articles.
Are you able to put the website in the chat, Lou?
I
or
shall.
to an email to all of us?
I'm going to put it up in a wee moment, Faye, but
Okay.
I will write it in as well.
Okay.
I can't concentrate on two things at once, so I'll do that in a moment. But just to find your way around the website, there's a bar at the top, as you can see. Circled in red are snapshots of definitions and key issues to aid people's understanding and clarity. These were all generated by the research and they're very snappy. The research, our research circled in blue, includes plain language summaries of actual published articles. Okay, so one is more like these are the definitions that we've drawn from many pieces of work, and the other one is like this is a summary of one particular article. Again, they're just different ways of reaching people with the same information. Our whole idea is that they're designed to be as short and punchy as possible, very plain language, and to make it easy for folks to understand key findings and to use those findings in their workplace to advocate for or make changes. In green, you can see there's also links to audio and video resources, including my TEDx, I don't have a TED, on lived experience work and other bits and pieces relevant to the work for those folk who are less interested in like just language. We were trying to build something around key pieces of work internationally, but because we're just kind of doing this on the side, we don't have the capacity to maintain that, and we're not actually going to keep doing that. We've still got a bunch of like my work and our work that's not up there, so we're just going to focus on what we've learned. Briefly, this is just a snippet of one of our summaries. So on those research summaries, right at the top of the page, we try to package up the key take-home messages so it can be shared in, staff meetings or supervision sessions or whatever in like 3 minutes. All of the summaries can also be downloaded as a PDF for those people who like hard copies. In the future, we'll be adding some short video summaries and looking into other features to make it easier for folks with vision, language, or literacy challenges. As I said, not everything's up there. The website's going to continue to grow. We actually just had a piece come out recently. It was our very first publication in a mainstream human resource or management journal, which was really hard to get in, and it's in the International Journal of Human Resource Management. We've got that summary up there now, and it's about how employing designated lived experience roles can help to develop more inclusive and healthy workplace culture, which we're pretty chuffed about. So that's the website. But you're right, Faye, I'll just write it in the chat because that's easier for people. Is that the website that Susanna has put in the chat there?
I think it is.
Thanks, Susanna. That's really cool.
Thank you for being awesome and creating it.
Thank you.
Susanna, Paula sent us those links before. For some reason, I saw it, but for some reason it's disappeared. I was going to copy that link and put it in the email to all of us, but I can't do that. Are you able to see that email that Paula sent, and can you put this link in that group and send it to all of us? Thanks. Thank you.
Yes, I can. You're welcome.
Thanks, Susanna.
Thank you both. Okay, so well, if you want to stay in the loop, you might want to bookmark this page. We're just going to continue adding stuff from the back catalogue as well as the future stuff. Now, look, if you are interested in the full scientific articles, God only knows why you would be. They're so dull. But if you are, then they're all available on my ResearchGate page. And again, this is sort of a loophole. If you don't have a university email address yourself, but you've got a family member or a colleague who does, it's like a social media kind of website place for researchers. So all you need is that institutional email address initially to get you going, and then it's free. And what you get is the ability to download the full scientific articles. Now, depending on the copyright of the particular article or journal, you'll either be able to just click, download, bang, you got it, or you can click, I think it's request publication. And then the researcher can typically, there's like a little thing and they can like email it to you privately. So that is another really good way to get access to stuff for free. The other really good thing about it is you'll see that researchers follow each other. And that's a good way to like I look at researchers I respect and value. I'm like, oh, who are they into? You know, and then I might go have a look at them. And it can be a way of assessing credibility of people, because I certainly don't want to be referring to folks who, you know, aren't really genuinely committed to this space, who are allies or who don't come from a lived experience perspective. So that's just some more resources. Finally, I really hope this provides you with some additional tools to go forth and contribute, as you're already doing so meaningfully, to transformational change in our dynamic and ever-evolving sector. And I thank you for your time, and also for making this a really special session. I think we've done 9 altogether, and to be honest, I was feeling a bit tired. My dogs have been really naughty lately at night, just having a lot of sleep, and I was feeling a bit like, oh, thank God it's the last one. But I have just enjoyed every second of this. It's just so wonderful seeing so many people here who I just love and respect so much, and I'm so grateful for. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, darling. That was fantastic. So it was remiss of me. I missed earlier on that I think it was Helly said that that NEMI are reviewing their role descriptions and using the document to do that. So that's fantastic. Was that you, Helly? Did you want to say anything?
Yeah, we've been working on the peer work refresh project for the last 10 months, and we've come up with peer work refresh, a vision for transformational change, and it takes into effect some of the guidelines in Lou's paper. So we're just stuck at the moment. We want to. The CEO is really keen to have peer workers on board, but nobody knows the next steps to do. We want to have a culture change through the organisation that includes lived experience workers, and we haven't been considered in the budget as far as I know, and there's been a lot of talk in the background, like we say nothing about us without us, but it's happening. They're talking about our programs, talking about our vision, but not putting the money towards it.
No, that's absolutely nonsense, complete nonsense. I mean, all you can do, I guess, is refer to the guidelines, and they make it very clear that that financial commitment is non-negotiable. So sorry to hear that, Helly. I mean, without putting the dollars behind it, it's just hot air, isn't it? I guess the other thing you could refer to is last year, some of you may have seen, I finally put together like a best practice model for peer employment in multidisciplinary environments, and that is very strong, probably stronger on that issue of financial stuff than the guidelines is. So Helly, you know that web page I showed you before, the lived experience leadership web page, is, I'll tell you which article it is, but it's, if you go on the research page, and Fern just told us all, which is so clever, that in fact, you don't have to have an institutional address anymore. I know a couple of years ago you did, because I got pulled up about it, but they must change it, which is marvelous. I celebrate that. So everyone can go and join ResearchGate, which is brilliant. I'm just going to put the link to that best practice paper summary in here. And then the actual full article, I'll find out while someone else is talking, and I'll pop that in there as well.
I think with the ResearchGate, I'm not sure if this is right, but I was invited to be able to join that after I had a few papers published, but I still haven't been able to work out how to use it. So I did write to the person that you suggested I write to, but I hadn't heard back. So
I've got. I was going to help you with that.
Yeah,
join if you want.
What was that?
I've got I can send 5 invites from my profile to people to join. So if you drop your email in the chat, I'll send you one so you can join up if that's a problem.
Fern, are you adept at using it?
Kind of. I've been using it for ages. I'm pretty sure you don't need an institutional email to join, because I'm pretty sure I signed up for it after I left uni. So, but yeah, I think Louise was one of the first people I hit up for an article way back when. Yeah, if you drop your email in the chat, I've got like 5 invites I can send to people to make it easier to join up with me if you would like.
And failing that, I will send people articles. Like, it's better for us as researchers if you download from ResearchGate, because it's like a matrix thing, and it helps us with our numbers and it helps us get other funding and stuff like that. But if you can't get it that way, just email me and I will send it to you. Just try it that way first. So Helly, I've just added, the first link is the summary of that best practice model, and the second link is the full article. And as I said, if you can't get it for some reason, let me know. I'll make sure you do. And thank you, Fern. That's really super helpful. I hope people take you up on it, because it's a great to be able to access all those resources.
Thank you. Susanna, I think you might have misunderstood what I was meaning. I was wondering if you would be able to, because I can't find that email anymore, put all of those links into an email to all of us. So there's been links added through the chat. I'm wondering if you could copy them and put them in the email that to all of us, link onto the one that Paula sent to all of us.
I understand what you mean now, Faye. Yeah, okay. I'll do my best.
Thank you. I don't know whether she BCC'd us, though. I can't find the damn email.
I'll have a look. Hold on. Yes, she has. She's she's copied it so that we can see each other. So yes, I'll be able to send it to
everybody. Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did I miss anything that anybody wanted to say in the chat?
If anyone has any other questions or comments, feel free.
Louise, just to reiterate about cultural competence. So the connection with Indigenous learnings and understanding as well. So culturally, we need to be competent in diversity and inclusion, and all those supervisions that could be lumped together in a way that an organisation has to not comply, but has to ensure that their workers at all levels meet these requirements, I would think.
Yeah, it is a strong theme within the guidelines. And I think the addition of that ongoing and revisited training around cultural capacity building is a really important point. And it's a good one to refer to, as you say, to make sure that the organisations are thinking about a whole of workforce approach to understanding and valuing diversity and inclusion. Yeah, there's quite a few different sections. So in the stages of development, there's different points where cultural capacity and cultural understanding is addressed, and it includes things like recommendations to build relationships with leaders, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, as well as culturally and linguistically diverse and other diverse identifications and backgrounds. So there's quite a bit there. One of the problems is it's in a way it's kind of dispersed because it's relevant across so many places. But again, when I put out this sort of external contents document, I will make sure, I'm going to make a note to myself right now, that that it's pointed to across all the different places that it occurs.
Thank you. I just think we are the best people to ensure that the focus is on what we need.
You bet. And could I just ask, because I'm going to send this out to Paula when I make this thing, if you could all share it really broadly, because, we really need, there's not been very good uptake, I don't think, of reading the document yet because of different reasons. And I really hope that at least if people know where to dive in and out of for the things that are specific to them, that will get better readership. Robin?
Two things. One, based on that, I've been sharing that document when I've been working with services here. So thank you. For those who don't know me, I live in Canada and it's almost 11 o'clock at night. So if I look a bit tired. But the other, God, I was going to say something intelligent and now I completely fucking forgot. Oh, sorry. Oh, yes, the cultural piece, the training piece. One of the, I'm just going to plead ignorance because I don't know if it's happening in Oz, but like we don't have anything like the Cert 4 here. So training agencies are delivering kind of peer support lived experience workforce training, depending on who they are. There's no regulatory body. But we've been approached by a few Indigenous communities to work with them to modify the lovely Western model of peer support, look at it as natural supports and include in like the cultural pieces rather than just looking from a Western model. And also we've been asked by one of the Pacific nations to work with them to look at, for those places that have certifications, actually looking at the certification for peer workers in a cultural context. Because right now they're saying, think white and you'll get through the exam. Is there anything like those kind of things happening in Oz?
Not to that degree, I must say, I just applaud that so much, Robin. That's so exciting to hear. Just even at the most basic level, as we know, the language of lived experience is culturally inappropriate and, you know, off-putting. What we do have here, Leilani Darwin, of course, has recently resigned as the director of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Lived Experience Centre, or Aboriginal, you know which centre I mean. And so I believe that there's work happening in the centre. I don't know exactly, but I don't know if it's as closely tied to peer work. And I guess one of the things that I've been advocating for a long time is that we need dedicated research.
No, we can't hear you just at the moment.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I don't know, just probably cloud. So one of the things I've been advocating for a long time, and the funders are just not.
Now we can.
Am I there? Yeah, the funders are just not interested in yet, is a piece on language and concepts of lived experience and how we can find common language and concepts to use across cultural and other sectors. So in homelessness, you know, in different spaces, in the substance use spaces, in whatever areas. So rather than having like mental health over here, talking mental health stuff and suicide prevention over here, and using language that's culturally inappropriate, getting everyone together or representatives so that we can start to find some common language and concepts and ways of then collectively advocating going forward. So anyway, I've been unsuccessful, but I would, you know, recommend if other people can find ways to fund stuff like that, go for it. I think it's really important.
We've been our peer support training here. We've because we run it through our company, we've got people at the moment that are working in human trafficking and peer support, HIV and peer support. We've got people coming from the like addiction kind of area of peer support, and we're all in it together and we're talking about the common concepts. But when we're doing like practice elements, if you want to call them role plays, then the breakout rooms are specific to whatever area people are working in. And that's been a great cross-pollination of stuff. And we've included family peer workers in there too, and doing the same concept, looking up where the differences are and just putting them into breakout. But what they've said in that is they're learning about each other in that so that they can go off and fight for similarities and still be able to respect differences.
Yeah, that's awesome. Robin, would you mind sending me a little bit about, I'd just love to be in the loop with that and I can refer to it too. Saw that Fern, you've sent a couple of, so New Zealand, I think you're right. I think there has been some great work incorporating Maori Indigenous knowledge into peer work. So that's probably somewhere to look. Robin, you're aware of that. And yeah, it is. One of the things with IPS, certainly I and others have been advocating really strongly. No, Faye, I think sometimes it's just bandwidth. To be honest, like I've been having trouble with things for days, but not just me, like everyone I know is having trouble. I don't know what's going on. But in terms of the intentional peer support training, it really is so worth it. I was lucky enough to train with Chris Hansen and Sherry many years ago, and absolutely life-changing, and still informs everything I do today, as well as my relationships. My relationship with my mum has been transformed by doing IPS, and I actually have a functional relationship with another human being, an intimate relationship. My God, who saw that coming? Certainly wouldn't have had it without IPS. So it is very expensive. It's worth it. But the other thing is that I and others are advocating very loudly for many, many more funded positions for IPS training as part of the Victorian rollout, because they've got dollars. So that could be something to keep an eye out for as well.
Yeah, I'm lucky in that I can actually afford it now because I'm couch surfing at mum's place, so I actually have money to spend because I'm homeless, which is weird. But I can now afford to pay for the training, so I can afford the $880. But up until very recently, I wouldn't have been able to afford it.
Shouldn't be that way though, especially when there are so few of us and there's so little access to training. It should be something that the government or governments are just covering, and that's a crying shame that you should have to go without other essential things in order to have that training. That's not right.
Lou, we've recently done some research at Flourish, and we've found that our peer workers are having better well-being through COVID than our other staff. And that's very often the thing that's put up, a blockage for employing peer workers, that, they're too fragile, that they're not going to be able to cope. And we've found the opposite.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point, Faye. I've got another article, which I'll add to the chat in a second, which is literally all about how organisations discovered that when people in lived experience roles didn't do well, it was shock horror because of their own crappy processes, particularly around recruitment, poorly designed PDs and all recruitment processes that didn't understand the work. So I'll pop that one in the summary in there as well. Well, we certainly can thrive in isolation and deprivation. The system teaches us to, doesn't it, Elsa?
Okay.
Does anybody have any further comments or?
I think it's wonderful, Lou, and you've done so much for our movement, our staff, the people that, our whole community of our lived experience community, just having this, level of academic research and papers to be able to back up what we've been saying for years. It's really incredibly important to us and value. We've needed it so much, and it's just the last few years I've really literally the last couple of years where I feel like, if I die tomorrow, I can say I saw really big changes happen in my lifetime. And I literally, prior to a couple of years ago, wouldn't have been able to say that. So it's really amazing. We've got a long way to go. We've got a long way to go, but we've come a long way from when I and Elsa and other people on the call started advocating for these changes. So really, thank you, Lou, and all of the other people that you work with that are lived experience academics that you work with, and everybody here on the chat that's doing so much to further our movement and our community, and to bring down the barriers between you know, or the barriers that exist to growing our lived experience workforce, not just peers. I think that we're at a crossroads here at a very important time where we are seeing, and I know you're very aware of it, Lou, as you mentioned, and the passion rose when you started talking about this. Johnny come lately's saying that they have lived experience to get roles that are designated lived experience roles, and that's a real concern. That's something that we need to work on, find ways to work on that in a really productive way. I've forgotten what the other thing was that I was going to say. Typical of me, my memory is always terrible, but since the floods up here, it's just really crashed and burned. So yeah.
Thank you, Faye, and thank you to everyone. I agree. I think this is a really special call because there's just so many people here that I've admired for so long, and yeah, it's great doing the research, and it's one part of the puzzle, and it's a very big puzzle, and we do our bit, and the people here do their bits, and I just love these rare-ish opportunities when we all get to sort of be in a room together, and it's just so energizing, and yeah, just I don't know, reminds me of why.
Elsa, are you giving a hands up or are you saying goodbye, darling?
I'm giving a hands up. I'd like to thank Lou for persisting in those environments where it is particularly hard. I know we're all doing that, but I know that you're very effective in getting our voice out there, and really appreciate all the hard work you're doing. It's been a long time that you've been banging on the doors, and I really appreciate you. Thank you.
And Helly, did you have your hand up waving to Elsa because you thought she was going, or did you have something you wanted to say? Okay. Okay. I think there's been more links put in the chat there. So I've
added them. It's okay.
Thank you, darling. Thank you. I texted Paula and asked if I need to keep the recording in the chat, but she tells me that no, that it's under control, that Lou will have it saved. So we'll make sure that we get all those links in case, because Paula will be able to go down through the chat and make sure that we've got all of them. I'm sorry, Susanna, that I threw it to you to say.
That's fine. I've managed to do a copy and paste, and I've created an email. I'm going to hit send at the end. It's okay. I think Kelly's unmuted now too, so she can speak.
Okay. So
I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here today, for having the energy, for having the drive, for having the vision. I didn't think I was going to see any changes in my generation. I thought the changes would happen in the generation behind me, but I'm starting to see some change now, and it's really buoyed me a lot. So, and Nima is starting to ask for, they say a lived experience, but not just a lived experience of distress, struggle, and recovery. And that's how they define lived experience. So a lived experience of recovery.
It's still a battle, isn't it? That's a good, you know, pretty good definition, but it's still a battle if we're going to have clinicians trying to co-opt the space, isn't it? So
actually, if I could speak to that too, please, just quickly. Lillian, I can't remember, and that's really embarrassing. I can't remember. Lelyn.
Ellie Hodges.
Yeah, and Ellie, when she spoke at Brookred's peer conference last year in Brisbane, spoke about how a lived experience is not just distress, but it's having to completely reimagine and rebuild your life as a result of that distress and have a return to well-being. And I really like how thorough that is in saying you've had to completely rethink and rebuild yourself from that experience.
I think that's a similar definition, Lou, isn't it, to what you've used in this document?
Yeah, it is. It is. And that was derived from the research as well. It was participants in the research that created that definition. And we talk about life-changing experience. But so somebody's pointed out for those, you know, who are perhaps born with, you know, whatever situation, like it might not be life-changing, but it's about impact. So it impacts on your life in ways that takes your life in a direction that, you know, you wouldn't have necessarily otherwise gone in, but it's, you know, has this really significant impact on your life. Actually, we're working on a paper at the moment to specifically look at that definition, but I have already used it in a few places because it's in the data.
Dee, oh, thanks. Sorry. Dee, I'm sorry if your hand's been up for a while. I didn't see it.
No, that's no problem. And I'm feeling a bit courageous to say this out loud, but I'm working with the College of Psychiatry at the moment. I've just finished their conference and got to do a symposium on lived experience, which was pretty interesting in itself. But they're developing a leadership position. So, and I know, and I'm scared about it because it's a hard place to coexist in. So I'll do my best for, you know, but it's a big ship to move quickly.
Gee, Deb, if we can help you in any way, Dee, sorry, I said Deb, Dee, if we can help you in any way.
Yeah. Well, I guess in a nutshell, I mean, I've had a fair whack of lateral violence from others that see me as co-chair of the Community Collaboration Committee, and my personal belief is you've got to be in the room to be in the conversation. So it doesn't mean that I'm pro everything, but I'm trying to be part of discussions and shift change.
Good on you, Dee. And like saying, and the guidelines, like we need these other mental health professionals to get on board. We need you know, other disciplines to understand. And you're right, it is scary because it really is. It is hard being inside the cave or the lion's mouth, so to speak. It's a tough gig. And I second what Faye's saying, like draw on the wider community because we should be there to support each other in these places. But we also we need these things to happen. We need to infiltrate, and we need those changes to occur, particularly in organisations that powerful. So good on you, and we'll, you know, send good energy and, you know, reach out.
Stay in touch with the PPIMS network too, because you get a lot of support and information and referral through PPIMS, the peer participation in mental health services.
Yeah, we need people inside tents and outside tents kicking from both directions, don't we? I was wondering whether I was wondering about the language that we use, you know, like that just, you know, kicking, pushing, fighting, but, you know, like that kind of language. I was wondering whether perhaps we need to consider our language, whether our language might be slowing things down too, whether they're, because I think that a lot of clinicians and that do and non-lived experience researchers do feel threatened by us, and I think that's where a lot of the defensiveness comes, because they feel threatened, and we need to keep our eye on the prize, and we need to review what we do, what we say, how we go about it, to see if there's any shifts we need to make to try and build those bridges more and get them to cross over, and, you know, and I've wondered about our language, whether we need to consider the fight, the war language that we use. And also I think it perhaps inflames the lateral violence that perhaps we use against each other as well.
So Faye, if I could just quickly add, I presented at the symposium through the lens of appreciative inquiry. So it was about, you know, affirming possibilities and big picture goals and imagining, dreaming, what ifs. And
Yeah, that's great.
it was actually more about influencing thought. And so it went, it landed well. If I can release the my slides, I'll be happy to share them with people.
That'd be great. Did you call that
Thank you.
appreciative inquiry?
Yeah, Appreciative Inquiry by David Cooper-Ryder. And it's been around for about 20, 25 years. And it's now part of the sort of lexicon of organisational, you know, complex strategic problem solving methodologies.
Great, great. Can you send us that info too?
Yep.
Dee? Thank you. Well, there's 7 minutes to the end. Is there? I mean, I think part of what I've really loved the presentation, Lou, but it's so lovely to just be with each other and share, isn't it? And even the question about lived experience supervision of clinical roles, you know, that's a really good thing that I think we need to start really pushing more. There's another aggressive term, but it's something. There's research happening now through the National Commission again. I think it's through the National Commission about leadership, lived experience in leadership, and that was something that I raised with them when I was contacted for that interview recently.
Good.
Is there anything that anyone else wanted to say? We haven't, Brooke, we haven't heard, you're doing amazing stuff. We haven't heard anything from you. Is there anything you'd like to say?
I was actually just going to put my hand up, Faye. Thank you.
There you go, Brooke.
Thanks.
So
I was actually contacted. I've been contacted by quite a few people for supervision in the lived experience space. I do some external supervision. And some of them have been psychologists. Now, the problem that they're facing is that their governing body doesn't recognise this form of lived experience or lived experience supervision as being up to their standards. So
now that's
there's some work to be done.
That's interesting because I'm advocating working with the head sherangs of that governing body about, and this is one of the things that I'm working with them about.
Yeah, so that's kind of putting a bit of a block in, and I've kind of said, like, you know, you probably, if you want to do that, it's great, but you know, you need to really sort of look at maybe doing 2 lots of supervision so that you're satisfying the needs of those for now until, you know, and people have been interested in that. I think people are wondering about how they can, you know, use their lived experience and use it to inform their work, and I think that's valid. You know, if people do have a lived experience, that's been my experience in multidisciplinary teams, that often when we start talking about our own lived experience, other people want to share theirs. So that's really nice. And the Let's Lead Academy with Yale, I think that's what you were kind of talking about, Faye, was it?
No, that's not what the research was, but I loved the sound of that and how I wish I'd known about that before. And the next group is full too. And how do I get on that email list?
Perhaps talk to Paul, and maybe there's some people in here that would like to do some, I don't know what they're doing for presentations, but certainly presentations or mentorship in that space. So yeah, and I was just was thinking earlier about, you know, like the co-opting as well of, like, one of the things that I've recently found, which has kind of annoyed me a little bit, and again it comes back to not going into that fight space, has been around how certain positions have been advertised, or all programs have been advertised as peer-led. But the actual meaning behind peer-led is not what I would think peer-led would be, like being all that embedded all the way down with the values and the practice, more so that we are people meeting people at the door, which to me is a bit tokenistic.
Right.
So that's
Right.
something that I think like further clarity around that across the sector to be able to, you know, really iron out some of those differences in understanding.
I think it ties in with defining like the lived experience knowledge base as well, Brooke, because it's still, and that's one thing that I'm really working on a lot at the moment, is putting some stuff out around what is the lived experience required for these roles. And it's obviously it's a range of things, it's a matrix of things almost, but until we have very clear definitions around what makes you employable, because like the knowledge, skills, you know, whatever, as a lived experience worker, it's very difficult to define what a lived experience led service needs to look like. Yeah, and it's also about, I think, the discipline. So again, I and others are working on things like discipline frameworks at the moment, or working towards those, so that we can very clearly say this is and is not what lived experience work is. So yeah, and those things need to be pretty fluid and big as well. Like, but it's about having enough space for multiple perspectives while still keeping the things that are clearly not lived experience on the outside.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's a puzzle, I guess we're still working out with all of that and how we do that together.
Yeah. For myself, I'm going to have to head off because it's 2 o'clock and life is just like that these days. So I just want to say thank you again. Everyone's wonderful.
Thank you, Lou.
I think Paula, Faith. Do people want to keep on chatting, or I think I'm supposed to turn the recording off, so I'll just do that.